He had been running from warmth, not toward it. The cold did not chase him, it received him. And in that reception, something ancient decided he would not disappear quietly. The ice did not announce itself as danger at first. It lay open and pale, a horizon without edges, breathing slowly beneath the wind. The man, once a guide who knew how to read maps and men, now a fugitive from his own competence, moved across it with the dull obedience of someone who had already lost the argument with survival. Frost clung to his eyelashes until blinking felt like tearing paper. Each step pressed soundless into snow that remembered every weight placed upon it. He carried exhaustion the way others carried faith, and it was heavier than the pack cutting into his shoulders. Somewhere beneath the wind, the ice groaned, not as a warning, but as a reminder that everything living here listened first and decided later. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments which country and city you're watching from. The moment matters, because this land remembers who bears witness. And as the man crossed a low ridge where wind had scoured the ground down to hard blue ice, the shape of another presence emerged, not as movement, but as intention. She did not rush him. She did not call out. She was already there, aligned with the slope, breath timed to the wind, her silhouette steady where nothing else held still. The blades at her side were wrapped, not hidden, and the restraint of that choice said more than threat ever could. She was Inuit, and the land recognized her first. Her boots did not argue with the snow, they agreed. Sealskin, repaired more than once, creased where memory lived. Her parka bore the quiet geometry of clan patterns, sewn by hands that understood weather better than calendars. When she stepped forward, the sound was not of approach, but of permission granted. She watched the man the way hunters watch the ice, reading fractures not yet visible, measuring what would break under weight and what would hold long enough to cross. In her gaze there was no curiosity, only assessment, and a patience shaped by winters that had buried the careless. The man stopped because stopping felt safer than falling. His lungs burned with air that tasted thin and sharp, as if each breath shaved something from inside him. He did not raise his hands. He barely trusted them to stay steady. Shame sat low in his stomach, colder than fear, because he recognized her posture and what it meant. He had guided others once, told them when to move and when to wait, and now he was being read like terrain. He understood, with a clarity that hurt, that survival here was not about strength, but about being allowed to continue. She closed the distance enough for him to see the fine frost collecting along the seam of her hood, the way snow caught in the fur trim and refused to fall. Her face was still, not severe, carved into calm by repetition and responsibility. When she spoke, it was not to him at first, but to the wind, a brief acknowledgement in her language that grounded the moment. The sound carried weight, not volume. It settled. Only then did her eyes return to him, and in them he saw not mercy, but a question older than either of them. Are you a danger to what keeps us alive? The blades came free of their wrapping with deliberate care. Metal breathed in the cold, a soft ringing that seemed to echo from somewhere beneath the ice. She knelt, not in submission, but in work. The act of sharpening was not urgent. It was precise. Stone against steel, rhythm against chaos. Each stroke carried a memory of hunts completed and winters survived. The man realized, absurdly, that she was not sharpening for him. She was sharpening because this was what one did when the land paused long enough to allow it. The lesson was not spoken, but it cut deeper than any edge. He sank to one knee without being told, more from relief than obedience. The ice pressed through the fabric of his pants, immediate and unforgiving. He felt small, not humiliated, but correctly scaled. The sound of sharpening steadied his breathing. In the distance, snow moved across the plain like smoke with purpose. He thought of the warmth he had fled, rooms crowded with voices that demanded answers he no longer trusted himself to give. Here, there were no explanations required, only alignment. When she finished, she tested the blade with her thumb, a brief kiss of skin to steel that left no blood. Satisfied, she stood and met his eyes again. This time, something shifted. Not kindness, but recognition. She had seen men like him before, men cracked open by choices made far south of here, men who believed running north could cauterize regret. Sometimes it did. Often it didn't. The difference was whether they listened. She turned and began to walk, not looking back, trusting that if he followed, it would be because he understood the terms. He followed. Not closely, not at a distance, but in the space she set without naming. The wind eased, just enough to hear the faint creak of ice adjusting under their combined weight. The cold remained merciless, but it felt for the first time in weeks, honest. As they moved toward a low rise where a temporary shelter waited, wood and bone fitted together with respect, the man felt something loosen inside his chest. Not hope, permission. And that, he understood, was how survival here began. The shelter did not welcome him, it tolerated him. Warmth arrived slowly like trust and hurt as it returned. Pain was the price of being brought back to the body. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke, seal oil, and old wood that had learned to survive by bending rather than breaking. The structure was low, deliberate in its refusal to allow standing tall, forcing humility into posture. The man crouched near the entrance until she gestured once, sharply, to a place closer to the fire. His fingers burned as circulation returned, a fierce ache that made him clench his jaw to keep from making sound. The flames did not dance. They worked. They consumed carefully, measured against the knowledge that fuel here was never wasted, only repurposed into survival. The walls creaked in the wind, not as complaint, but as confirmation that they were still holding. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments which country and city you're watching from. The woman removed her gloves with slow precision, setting them near the fire without letting them touch flame. Her hands were scarred in the quiet way of people who use them honestly. Cuts closed cleanly, burns faded into pale reminders. She did not ask his name. Names carried weight, and weight was not always safe. Instead, she poured a small amount of hot liquid into a carved cup and slid it toward him with her foot, never breaking her line of sight. The gesture was practical, not generous. Drink and stay conscious. Drink and prove you intended to remain among the living. He took the cup with both hands, the heat almost unbearable. The liquid tasted of fat and smoke, grounding in a way he had forgotten nourishment could be. His shoulders slumped as the worst of the cold retreated, replaced by a trembling that had nothing to do with temperature. He realized then how close he had been to letting go out there, how thin the line had been between movement and surrender. The shame returned, but it was different now, less corrosive, more instructive. He understood that survival was not a solitary achievement. It was a negotiation, renewed daily, with land and people who had no obligation to accept you. She watched him drink, not as a caretaker, but as a witness. When he finished, she turned her attention back to her blades. The sharpening resumed, quieter now, each stroke slower, more deliberate. Firelight caught the metal and threw brief reflections onto the walls, like memories passing too quickly to grasp. This was not maintenance, it was ritual without spectacle. In her world, repetition was reverence. Doing a thing well again and again was how respect was shown, to tools, to animals, to the ice itself. The man leaned back against the wall, careful not to touch what he had not been invited to touch. His mind, starved of distraction, began to surface what he had tried to outrun. A failed expedition, a decision made too late, faces he could still see when he closed his eyes, mouths opening in questions he had no answers for. He had been a guide once, because he believed knowing the way forward could absolve him of what lay behind. It had not. The Arctic had not erased that truth. It had sharpened it, like steel against stone. She spoke again, briefly this time to him. The words were spare, her accent shaped by cold and distance, but the meaning was clear enough. Morning would decide things. The clan moved with the light, and nothing happened here without their knowing. If he stayed, it would not be as a guest, and not as a prisoner. It would be as a question put before many eyes. The idea settled between them, heavy but fair. He nodded once, the smallest possible acknowledgement, understanding that agreement here was shown through action, not speech. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of ice adjusting, deep, resonant, like the breath of something vast turning in its sleep. The shelter responded with a low creak, wood flexing, but not yielding. She reached out and adjusted a support beam by instinct alone, her body already moving before thought arrived. The man watched, struck by the intimacy of that knowledge. This was not domination of nature, it was coexistence honed over generations. He felt for the first time the weight of being truly unprepared, not for cold but for belonging. As the fire burned lower, she finally wrapped the blades again, this time with care that bordered on tenderness. She placed them within reach, not because she feared him, but because readiness here was non-negotiable. Then she lay down, turning her back to him without hesitation. The trust implicit in that gesture was heavier than any warning. He remained awake long after the fire dimmed, listening to the shelter breathe, to the ice speak in its slow language, to his own pulse finding a steadier rhythm. By the time sleep claimed him, it was not escape he dreamed of, but stillness. And in that stillness he sensed what morning would bring, not answers, but judgment shaped by many lives intertwined with this land. Whatever happened next would not belong to him alone. That, he realized, was the beginning of something like repair. Morning did not arrive gently. It came as a thinning of darkness, a pressure easing from the air. Light did not warm, it revealed. The first sound was not voices, but movement. Snow compressed under measured steps, the faint scrape of sled runners finding their line. The shelter seemed to wake before the man did, its joints answering the change in temperature with small, precise complaints. He opened his eyes to a world rinsed pale blue, the fire reduced to a careful memory of heat. His breath fogged the space, steady now, no longer panicked. She was already awake, sitting upright, hands resting on her knees, listening. There was no urgency in her posture, only readiness shaped by habit. Whatever was coming had been expected long before he arrived. Outside, figures emerged from the low light, not as a crowd, but as a pattern. They moved with the land's permission, spaced in a way that left room for wind and thought. Parkas bore the quiet signatures of different families, variations that spoke to lineage without needing explanation. No one announced themselves. The clan did not gather to witness. They gathered to decide. The man felt the weight of that distinction settle on his shoulders, heavier than any pack he had carried. He stepped out when she did, matching her pace without trying to mirror it, learning quickly that imitation here rang false. The cold met him again, sharper in daylight, as if offended by the brief truce of night. Frost crept back along his lashes, but he did not blink it away. He stood where she indicated, a half step behind and to the side, a position that said more than words ever could. Faces turned toward him, some curious, some guarded, none hostile. He searched for anger and did not find it. What he found instead was calculation, the slow arithmetic of people who had learned to measure risk without drama. An elder stepped forward, her hair silver against the dark fur of her hood, eyes clear and unhurried. She spoke to the Huntress first, not out of deference, but process. The exchange was brief, efficient, layered with meaning that traveled beneath the surface of sound. The man caught fragments, where he was found, how he moved, what the land had said about him. He realized then that his actions had already been interpreted, weighed against a ledger far older than law. Here intent mattered, but impact mattered more. When the elder turned to him, the pause stretched. Silence here was not absence. It was examination. He resisted the urge to fill it, understanding finally that explanation was a Southern reflex. Instead, he stood and let the cold speak through him. His trembling hands, the scars on his knuckles, the way he held his weight as if unsure it deserved support. The elder's gaze softened, not with pity, but with recognition. She had seen men arrive carrying the wreckage of choices made elsewhere. Some learned, some did not. The difference was rarely declared in advance. The huntress stepped forward then, placing her wrapped blades on the snow between them. The gesture was deliberate, startling in its openness. Tools were extensions of the self. To offer them, even symbolically, was to place one's judgment on the line. She spoke, briefly, her voice steady. She did not defend him. She described him, how he followed, how he waited, how he listened to the ice instead of arguing with it. The elder nodded once, filing each observation away where decisions were made. The clan murmured, not disagreement but alignment forming. The man felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with the strange ache of being seen accurately for the first time in years. No one asked why he had run north. No one demanded confession. The land had already recorded his arrival. The rest was excess. The elder's verdict, when it came, was not a sentence but a condition. He would remain through the day. He would work where directed. He would speak only when necessary. By evening, the ice would have more to say. They broke apart as they had formed, purpose redistributing itself across the white expanse. The huntress retrieved her blades and turned to him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes intent. This was not protection. It was responsibility. She handed him a task, simple, physical, honest. Repair a sled runner damaged by the night's cold. Use what you know, learn what you don't. The instruction carried no threat, only expectation. He nodded, feeling something unfamiliar settle into place, usefulness without performance. As he knelt by the sled, hands numbing as he worked wood and binding into alignment, he became aware of the quiet rhythm around him, the scrape of tools, the low exchange of voices, the distant crack of ice shifting under sun that offered light but no mercy. The huntress moved through the space with calm authority, adjusting, correcting, never hovering. Each glance she offered was brief, sufficient. Trust here was incremental, earned in small, observable acts. By the time the sun climbed enough to throw long shadows across the snow, the sled stood ready. He stepped back, flexing stiff fingers, and met the elder's gaze again from across the clearing. There was no smile. There was, however, no dismissal. The day stretched ahead, unresolved and honest. He understood then that belonging here would not be granted in a single morning. It would be negotiated, blade sharp and patient, against the moving ice. Work did not soften the cold. It taught the body where to place it. Pain became information, not warning. Silence, when shared, began to carry shape. The hours unfolded without ceremony. The man moved where he was directed, lifting, binding, scraping, learning the exact pressure required to persuade frozen materials to cooperate rather than shatter. His hands split and bled in thin lines that froze almost immediately, the red turning dark and quiet. No one commented. Injury here was not spectacle. It was data. He learned to warm his fingers in brief intervals, not by the fire but against his own neck, preserving heat the way the others did. The huntress watched from a distance that respected his effort, stepping in only when correction was necessary. Her guidance came without words, an adjusted angle, a steadier pace demonstrated once and then withdrawn. The lesson was clear. Attention was the currency, not praise. As the sun climbed, the ice answered with sound. Low booms rolled beneath the surface, a reminder that nothing here was static, least of all the ground beneath their lives. The clan responded instinctively, redistributing weight, moving supplies a hand's breadth at a time. The man followed cues he barely understood, trusting the choreography he was only beginning to perceive. He felt the land working against his assumptions, dismantling the idea that strength alone could negotiate survival. Strength here was accuracy. Strength was knowing when not to insist. The huntress crossed the clearing and knelt beside him without breaking his rhythm. She checked the runner, fingers tracing the line where wood met binding, nodding once. Approval was subtle, almost invisible, but it landed with force. She gestured toward the horizon where the ice darkened into a web of lines too fine for untrained eyes. Her gaze lingered there longer than before. He understood, without explanation, that this place required reading not just what was present, but what was about to happen. The future here announced itself softly. They moved together then, not as companions, but as aligned labor. She set snares where the snow carried the right tension. He anchored them, learning the difference between a knot that held and one that lied about holding. She demonstrated how to test the ice with the butt of a spear, listening for tone, not echo. The sound traveled through bone as much as ear. He repeated the motion, awkward at first, then cleaner. When he faltered, she waited. When he corrected, she moved on. Trust accrued without declaration. At midday, food was shared without ritual. Fat and dried meat passed hand to hand, portions modest and sufficient. He ate what was given and no more, understanding finally that restraint here was not deprivation, but respect for continuity. The clan spoke among themselves in low currents of sound, conversation shaped by tasks rather than opinions. He caught no gossip, no speculation about him. His presence was being evaluated through work alone. The relief of that simplicity surprised him, loosening something knotted behind his sternum. The huntress paused near him as the light shifted, the sun's arc flattening into the long afternoon. She pointed to his hands, then to the ice, then to her own chest, a sequence that read like instruction rather than symbolism. Care for what lets you work. Read what can kill you. Know where fear lives and do not let it drive. She did not wait for acknowledgement. The teaching was already delivered in the asking. He wrapped his hands more carefully after that, adjusting his movements to conserve heat, noticing how attention itself generated warmth. Later, a crack split the quiet, a sharp report that turned heads without panic. The ice had shifted where it was expected to shift. The clan adjusted, moving as one organism, weight and intention redistributed along practiced lines. The man followed, heart steady despite the sound, because no one else ran. He felt the difference between fear shared and fear isolated. Here, danger was communal knowledge, not personal drama. He took his place where indicated, feeling the ice settle beneath him like a held breath released. As the day thinned toward evening, the elder approached him again, this time without ceremony. Her eyes went to the work completed, then to his posture, then briefly to the huntress. The exchange that followed was nearly wordless, a nod, a glance, a pause that said enough. The condition remained. Night would decide what day could not. He understood that survival here was a series of thresholds, each crossed only after the last had been honored. When the light finally softened into its long blue stretch, the man found himself standing beside the huntress at the edge of the camp, both looking toward the darkening web of ice. The wind rose, thin and insistent, carrying the scent of cold iron and distant snow. He did not speak. She did not either. The silence between them had changed. It no longer tested him. It included him. Whatever judgment the night would bring, it would do so on ground he had begun at last to understand. Night did not fall. It settled. The ice spoke more clearly after dark. By morning, nothing here would be undecided. The fire at the center of the camp burned low and steady, its light absorbed more than reflected, as if the darkness itself were listening. The wind threaded through fur and fabric, finding every place where warmth tried to hide. The man sat where he had been directed, close enough to the heat to survive, far enough to remember it was not his. His body ached in a way that felt earned, not punished. Each breath rose in a slow cloud and vanished, taken by the air without comment. Around him, the clan moved with deliberate quiet, settling into positions shaped by habit and history. Night work here was not rest. It was vigilance practiced gently. The Huntress stood across the fire, her face lit in uneven planes by flame. The blades rested beside her, wrapped, silent, present. She did not watch him directly, but he felt her awareness like a line drawn through the space between them. He understood now that what she had offered him was not protection, but context. She had placed him where the land could measure him honestly. The realization steadied him more than warmth ever could. He had spent too long performing competence for people who confused certainty with truth. Here, there was no performance left to give. The ice answered the cooling air with sound, deep, rolling cracks that traveled underfoot and vanished into distance. The man felt them through his bones, the way she had taught him to listen, and did not flinch. Around the fire, heads turned, adjustments made, but no one rose in alarm. This was expected. The land was rearranging itself, and those who lived here rearranged with it. He felt for the first time the difference between danger and fear. Danger was real. Fear was optional. The elder approached the fire last, her presence quieting what little movement remained. She spoke, not loudly, not at length. Her words carried the cadence of decisions that did not require persuasion. She addressed the Huntress first, then the space where the man sat, then the fire itself, acknowledging each as necessary witnesses. The verdict was not framed as mercy or approval. It was framed as fact. He had been found. He had worked. He had listened. The ice had not rejected him. That was enough to continue. The Huntress stepped forward then and did something no one expected. She unwrapped one blade, not offering it, not surrendering it, but placing it point down in the snow between them. The gesture was not symbolic in the way outsiders like to imagine. It was practical and intimate. The blade marked a boundary and a bond at once. It said, "What is sharp can protect or destroy, depending on how it is held." She looked at him fully now, her gaze steady, unflinching. In it, he saw the terms of his staying. No running, no claiming, no forgetting whose land this was. He stood slowly, careful not to rush the moment into something smaller than it was. The cold pressed against him, but it no longer felt like an enemy. He inclined his head, not a bow, not submission, but acknowledgement. The elder watched without interruption, eyes sharp as the ice itself. The man understood that he was not being given a new life. He was being allowed to remain long enough to decide what kind of life he was willing to build under conditions that would not lie to him. As the night deepened, the clan returned to their quiet tasks. The decision absorbed back into the rhythm of survival. The fire burned lower. The wind eased, as if satisfied. The Huntress retrieved her blade and wrapped it again, this time with a care that felt almost ceremonial. She turned away, trusting him to find his place without instruction. He did. Not beside her, not behind her, but near enough to learn and far enough to remember he was still a guest of the ice. When morning finally came, it did not arrive with surprise. The light crept back across the white, touching the camp, the tools, the people who had already been awake for hours. The man rose with them, body stiff, spirit steadier than it had been in years. Somewhere beneath his feet, the ice shifted and held. He understood then that the land had done what it always did. It had stripped him down to what was true, and decided that for now, it was enough.